chapter 24 or chapter 21 in your review book has to be done by Thursday. I wrote that down in the, but she put down Tuesday on the board. So problem. But it's going to be like the 10 question.
So if we have a quiz on Thursday, then it's actually going.
Let me think. We're kind of crunching the time. We might not have time for it. Which means a bigger test. All right, so let's get the Spanish American War. Where did we finish it? Did we get to the reconcentration policy? Did we have that?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, Cuba Libre, reconcentration, with Hawaii.
Stopped at Cuba Libre.
Do we have this? So the reconcentration, did I show you garroting? How about this? Yeah, and so by 1896, 1897, the war. By 1896, Cuba Libre had gone to the hands. And so the revolution was not ending, but it was, and certainly not defeated, but they were pushed back because of the mass starvation in these horrific camps. And did I tell you that Britain would use this? And that's where the term concentration camps would come about. The United States used these in the Philippines. And these would be used as justification for the war. And then the US would do that too. And so part of the reason these were such a big deal was yellow journalism. Yellow journalism. And yellow journalism is sensationalism in the newspaper. And so there's an example from the New York World right there. Your woman jumps from the Brooklyn Bridge and survives. Every crime, every bloody murder, they would advertise or they would sensationalize to sell papers. There are over 100 daily newspapers in New York. They're all in competition. And Joseph Pulitzer learned by the 1880s, the more bloody, gruesome stories that he would show. And he would have his reporters go out and find stories that were sensational to get people to buy, that would sell. William Randolph Hearst inherited, got a big portion from the first real big oil kerosene craze in the 1860s, 1870s. And he bought the failing New York Journal, and he jumped in with both feet in yellow journalism, would become one of the most influential newspaper publishers in American history. Selling sensationalism. I mean, right, the year before the war, they found this headless, armless torso floating in the Hudson River. And for 2 months, they made this into a massive story about finding what happened to this body. And I mean, you can't help it. You hear that, like, oh, what happened? But they made it into this massive story. But this reminds me of like local television news today. The rule for local television news is if it leads, it leads. Meaning the most gruesome stories, accidents, murders, they publicize. And so we see that to this very day, the most sensational ones, which is kind of fascinating for me. The murder rate today is so much lower than it was in the 1980s and 1990s. I mean, it's so much lower. Not even close. And yet people think crime is really high because they just advertise, they promote that so much. Even during the little brief increase during COVID, it didn't match the 1990s and 1980s. I know exactly what you're thinking. That's the time I grew up. We had it tough. Actually, the crime was so much higher in the 80s and 90s. But yellow journalism goes on to the stick. And jingoism is the term for pushing for war. And both of them learned that sells favor. That makes money. Go ahead, we answer the question. Not now. The study on it, so I read stuff up. I'll get to it in a second. So, thank you. Jingoism is war. And so, even by 1896, 1897, as Cuba Libre hit the hills, when Cuba Libre hit the hills, the newspapers kept selling because, wow, war is exciting. War sells papers. And they really pushed the brutality of the reconcentration policy. Here, a Cuban mother, and I'm not sure what she's holding. I think it's supposed to be a starving baby, even though it looks like a homunculus. Homunculus is Middle Ages drawings where they would draw babies as adults. That's just kind of the medieval style. But still, they're trying to show the hell of this. Frederick Remington is one of the most famous artists in American history. Remington, right there. He would do a lot of very dramatic shots of like cavalry charges. There's a bunch of Remington at the historicals. And he made money doing sketches for newspapers. Pulitzer sent him down to the night at the end of 1897. And Remington wired back to Pulitzer, essentially saying, there's nothing going on. Cuba Libre's in the hills. Can I come home? And Pulitzer responded with, you provide the pictures, I'll provide them. Just give me stuff. So that's what Remington gave him. So Spaniards searched women on American steamers. A steamer is a steam-powered passenger ship. So a small passenger ship in a van. And does it remind you of another picture I showed you? Remember that picture of that plate where it showed the Caucasian woman in the middle, and then 4 leering people on the outside? You remember that picture? It's almost the same thing, isn't it? She's naked. So it's implying she's being strip searched. But let's be very clear. They're also implying that something else is going to happen. We look at them in the shadows, leering, staring at her. Obviously going to do more. She's in danger. It's almost the same picture. Strip searching her for weapons to help Cuba Libre. Did that ever happen? No, there was some searches for weapons in the hull of passenger liners, but no, that never happened. Remington heard something, oh, that could happen. So he drew a story, and then that went all for the New York World and was soon picked up all over the United States. These kind of things sold war. McKinley, the new president, well, let me rephrase that, Marcus Hanna, didn't want war. Wars make the market scared. Anything that's insecure might drop the market down. But he's being pushed for it. Well, why is it called yellow journalism? The New York World was the first newspaper to have cartoons that would be popular. And the most popular cartoon in the 1880s, 1890s was called Hogan's Alley. And the main character, the yellow kid. Thus, yellow journalism. That's what they called it after the yellow kid. And if you look at this cartoon, it says the crowd gets up an election bonfire and the yellow kid plays Nero. So Nero supposedly fiddled while Rome burned. I have no idea what's going on. There's all kinds of New York City references from the 1880s, some kind of racist references. We have a goat, parrot, pat on the head. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. It's just lots of stuff. A hot foot, hot pants. That's a practical joke. You put a piece of paper or put a writing in the back of someone's pants and light it on fire. But yeah, I have no idea what's going on. But that's where yellow journalism, and here's Pulitzer and Hearst pushing for war as the yellow kid. And that's supposed to be creepy, and it is. So, what was the U.S. policy towards Cuba? McKinley put pressure on Spain a little bit, but for the most part, the United States government stayed neutral of its colonial policy for various reasons, partially because Spain had colonies in Britain, so did France, so did Germany. We say anything about that? And the United States is just now on the edge of becoming a world power. But this cartoon shows what the push was in the United States. And it says the duty of the hour to save her, not only from Spain, but a worse fate. And this is a very clever cartoon, because if you look at this and don't really think about it, which I did the first time I saw it, it just looks like we're going to help Cuba. Look at poor Cuba. By the way, remember those pictures I showed you last Thursday of the way they drew Cubans or Filipinos, those horrific drawings? Look at her there. She looks a lot different now. She looks sympathetic. And there is Cuba. What's What's killing her? Anarchy. What's causing the anarchy? Huh? Is it Spanish misrule? No, Spanish misrule is making it worse. But is it Spanish misrule? No, it's Cuba's an anarchy. And we got to save Cuba from whom? It's themselves. They govern themselves. Oh, poor Cuba needs the United States to come. It's not Spain that's doing it, it's Cuba. Spain's just making it worse. This is justifying taking it over. And more, that is going to be the idea. We have to save Cuba for itself. We have to save Cuba from themselves. We have to save Cuba from Spain and from Cubans. And yes, this was intensely racialized. 2/3 of the population of Cuba are of African descent, the legacy of slavery. So, in early 1898, we, as I still remember my history teacher, my junior in high school, Mr. Leckie say, Deloma. That's stuck in my head now, even though that's not. Pronounce it, the Deloma letter. He was the U.S. ambassador, or sorry, the Spanish ambassador to the United States. He wrote a top secret telegram. It had to be from, I think, the Western Union Station and across the transatlantic cable to Madrid. And this is what he said. He's the ambassador. So you can read what he said in quotes. What's he saying about McKinley here? Once you get done reading it. He never made anybody read this, except for the foreign ministry in Madrid. What's he calling McKinley? Among other things. Is this a compliment? Hey, he's a coward. He can't make up his mind. He'll do whatever politicians do on one side. He'll keep the jingles unhappy, but always looking for a way out. He'll never make a stand. He's weak and inefficient and maybe dumb. William Randolph Hearst had someone working at the Western Union Station, and they made a copy of this before they sent it. And Hearst published this in the newspaper, and soon it's all over the United States. Can you imagine their reaction in the US? All of a sudden, how dare the evil nation of Spain criticize our president? Now, remember those pictures I showed you from 1896 about the way that people thought about McKinley? What do they think of McKinley? Most Americans thought this. Huh? Say it louder. Yeah, they thought he was just a puppet of Hannah. Not much there. The Americans thought this about him. But that's part of the anger. We can make fun of our president. You can't. He's our idiot. He's not your idiot. In fact, McKinley's own Undersecretary of the Navy, Teddy Roosevelt, said that McKinley didn't have the backbone of a chocolate eclair. You know what chocolate eclair is? Yeah, pastry. His own Undersecretary of the Navy said this. But how dare you say this? And now McKinley's got to look tough. And so he immediately dispatched the obsolescent, meaning nearly obsolete, battleship, the USS Maine. Technology was changing so fast, it was only built 13 years before this, and it was already obsolete. On the edge of obsolete. Now, basically, it was to protect American interests, but McKinley's trying to look tough. He didn't know what to do. And Hannah, through his business advisors, are really reluctant to go to war. What's going to happen to the Maine? It will blow up. The Maine was sunk February 1898, February 15th, which is February. So all this is happening really fast. Now, to this day, we don't know what sunk the Maine. Do we? Look at the New York Journal, Hearst's paper. Destruction of the warship Maine was the work of an enemy. Roosevelt, who, wherever there was a reporter, Roosevelt had a comment. He loved press. It was not an accident. Naval officers think the Maine was destroyed by a Spanish mine. And look at this picture. See the Maine? See that right there? Implying there was a Spanish underwater mine that blew up the Maine, destroyed it. Heck, they'll even offer a reward. Like anyone's going to collect that reward. Hearst was big on offering rewards. Look at the world. They don't even mess around. Explosion caused by a bomb and torpedo. 260 sailors died. They even show flaming bodies flying out of the Maine being destroyed. It was clearly the work of an enemy. And you can imagine what cartoons like this are going to push the United States to do. Look at that brute animal, savage, which fits in then with that reconcentration policy, etc. What happened to the Maine? Well, I'll tell you one thing for certain, with 100% certitude, the Spanish did not blow up the Maine. They're not insane. Hey, that right. Opposed. But it's amazing how quickly they would say that the Spanish would do something so completely illogical. Spain was a weak kingdom. They had a lot of ships, but they were old. Most of them were still iron armor, not steel. And they're across the Atlantic Ocean. The United States is right there. It's absolutely insane. No way they did it. But immediately went out to the papers, and soon President McKinley is going to say, well, we believe Spain did it. What happened almost certainly? In the coal bins. They had bags of coal and then free sending. Coal just piles up. The bags full so they can put it in and get steam turbines going fast. All the dust in enclosed place, there was a spot here. Just like what could happen to the Shirtwaist fire, just a different problem. 260 people died, 258, I'm sorry. They're now buried at Arlington National Cemetery, and the reaction was fierce. And you can guess what the saying is going to be. Remember the Maine and to hell with Spain. That's the Maine. This mast is now at Arlington National Cemetery. It's still there. I guess it's a popular diving place. You go through the ruins of the Maine. They drug it out a little bit in Havana Harbor and it's still there. And this is, they have many funeral processions. This is through New York City. Then eventually down to Washington, D.C. and then Arlington National Cemetery. And so this happened in February. McKinley was opposed to war because Hannah was reluctant. And then this changed their mind when they realized a couple of things. Spain is weak. And boy, if the United States gets into this empire business, boy, are they going to want steel. Boy, are they going to want food. Heck, and these food processors, they have this old meat that they just been storing in the basement when it wasn't sold during the panic. Not refrigerated, just stay. We can pull that baby out and sell it to the soldiers. Or sell it to the army. We can make money. And once business leaders change their mind, literally overnight, McKinley has published for that. It was not unanimous, but it was, most Americans believed that the Maine was destroyed by Spain. Does this remind you of another war? Do you remember Lincoln's spot resolution? Show me the spot on American soil where American cavalry were killed by Mexico, starting the Mexican-American War. And they lied. They didn't know where. They said they did. Here, another lie. Beginning to over. I have good news for you. This will happen again in our history. Yay. Not just ours, but yes, ours would be. They sent out levies for the various troops. They accidentally added another zero to Montana. So Montana actually sent a disproportionately large number of troops. Remember those National Guards, a bunch of guardsmen, a bunch of them were sent to Florida, and a bunch were sent to Montana, someplace else. So here is Teddy Roosevelt. And there he is posing for a picture as Undersecretary of the Navy. Sometimes you see him as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. That's back when there was a Navy department and a War department. Now just one Department of Defense. He was an ambitious progressive Republican from New York who made his name fighting some of the corruption of Tammany Hall. He's a progressive Republican, and so actually different than most Republicans. But he was a publicity hound. Desperately wanted to fight. His dad hired a substitute in the Civil War, so he wanted to prove he was manly. That so much of his life would be like this. He had some security issues, sick as a child, that kind of thing. But he did send an order, and he's going to take full credit for this order, even though clearly he could not make this on his own. But he made a big deal about it. He sent the order for the US Navy to make its first major action in this war, the afternoon after declaration of war. He sent the order for the United States Navy to attack where? I'll give you a hint. It's not Cuba. Cuba's the Spanish colony. What Spanish colony did he order the attack on? The Philippines. And it's all about the Philippines. Think about the Philippines. Millions of people live there. Over 1,000 islands in that archipelago. And what a strategic location. Right off the coast of China, just north of the Dutch East Indies, today Indonesia. It's to be important base, crossroads for trade, a big market. Philippines. And that's what he ordered to attack. The United States had some of its best, newest ships. We basically rented a berth in the British colony of Hong Kong. And they were ordered to sail to Hong Kong and attack the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay. Spain had about 18 ships too, but they still had wooden hulls with iron armor, old decrepit ships. So they sailed in under Commodore Thomas Dewey, and this will be the Battle of Manila Bay. The Battle of Manila Bay. Now I looked for a picture of Dewey, and the first picture that came up was this, so I decided to show you this picture. That is, of course, Mickey Rat. And even though it is partially hidden, right here, that's that rat. That was drawn from Mickey Rat. See, pretty nice, huh? Mickey Rat. So, I was like Mickey Rat. There's Dewey. And the Battle of Manila Bay was a decisive US victory. Spanish ships, so we still had powder cannon, and they didn't have a chance. The US fleet sailed in, but the US had not really, nobody had with their new weapons. In fact, his flagship, the Hartford, had cannon that had guns that are 8-inch. And that means they could go about 12,000 yards. And they never practiced anything longer than about 500 yards. 99% of the shots the US fired missed. But the Spanish were so outclassed that they would basically ground themselves and surrender. A decisive victory. Dewey's going to become the first big hero. They're going to write songs about him. People think he might be president. Dewey said, I don't think the job of president would be that hard. I should be president. Then he kind of went out of favor. People want to at least act like the president is a hard job. So now the Spanish fleet is destroyed. And now it's just got to wait for the US to occupy. Just got to wait. So many of those troops from Montana, those National Guardsmen and others, they were diverted to San Francisco, and they're going to go to the Philippines. One more thing. In the Philippines, there was a revolution for independence there too. And they thought the United States was there to liberate them. Freedom to liberty. Boy, are they going to be shocked. That's not at all what's going to happen. Well, back to this. There were a lot of people that were opposed to this imperialistic war. And so, in the first appropriations bill to pay for the war, the Teller Amendment was done. And it said, not a war of conquest. It literally said that. We are bringing freedom and independence to the Cuban people. And so it said Cuba will be independent, but you notice I put a little question mark there? Hey, define independence. You know, you're independent. We just control your government. We got a flag. Here's another one of these cartoons. US defending Cuba. It's supposed to be like a stage show against evil Spain. And look at the face of Cuba. Once again, sympathetic. Trying to be sympathetic. It's not that horrible caricature I showed you before. What about those other areas? What about the Philippines? Wasn't mentioned. Puerto Rico, not mentioned. Guam, not mentioned. We'll figure it out. And so, the big areas, besides Cuba, not mentioned at all. Here's another one of those cartoons. Evil Spain. US. Look at the face. Sympathetic. Trying to explain this, trying to be sympathetic. I'll show you what I mean in a second. The US Army was only 28,000 people, went up 250,000 people in a month and a half. Some were National Guardsmen with limited training, some just volunteered. Most of the men, a few of the regular soldiers had khaki pants and blue tops, but most of the National Guardsmen were still wearing navy blue tops, light blue bottoms made out of wool. And as we all know, wool is perfect for the jungle, right? This is science. What does wool do? It keeps the heat out, right? So you're cooler. Those poor guys. I just think about how awful that must have been down there. We had the US didn't purchase machine guns. They're still using Gatling guns from the Civil War era. We had modern rifles called the Craig, but they jammed in humid weather. I'm sure that won't be a problem. Fortunately for us, the Spanish army, which had white uniforms and straw hats, their morale was zero. Discipline was brutal, the training was bad. They were unamused about fighting. Well, the first soldiers to arrive in Tampa were, remember, a segregated army. We talked about how they used African-American soldiers to put down strikes, where these so-called colored regiments. And that will lead to what's called the Tampa Riot in the end of May of that 1898. So you have these soldiers from segregated units were the first ones there. They incorrectly, also kind of the racism at the time, that soldiers of African descent would be better able to handle yellow fever. They didn't know what caused yellow fever. The thought was they would be better, which of course is not true. But they were sent there. What were the laws that segregated the South? Do you remember the name of that? Yeah, the Jim Crow laws. Well, they assumed since they were soldiers ready to fight in this war that everybody was wearing little buttons saying "Remember the Maine," that they could go around Tampa, be treated like heroes almost, and go into places like restaurants or bars that were segregated. And a few were arrested by the local police. That caused a conflict that soldiers basically got really mad. They're arrested. And what came out of this is going to be known as a race riot in Tampa, where mostly white men, the police, marauding through the streets of Tampa Bay, jumping and ambushing black soldiers, and then, of course, fighting back to defend themselves. Over 200 people would be wounded. And yes, there'd be over 10 people die. Who was blamed? Yeah, the soldiers. Some were court-martialed, all of them were restricted to camps. And I'm mentioning this to show you how this is an incredibly racist time. And almost the same thing's going to happen in World War I and World War II. Almost exactly the same kind of stuff. And it'll happen more places now those wars were bigger, but of course in Tampa and all, in both those other ones. Teddy, Roosevelt formed his own unit called the Rough Riders. And this was a volunteer cavalry. He made a big deal about it. He had city slickers from New York and cowboys from the plains join this unit. And he was a publicity hound, and he gave great quotes. So we had more reporters follow him than actually follow General Shaver in command of the operation. And so there's going to be so many legends of them charging by horseback against Spanish defenses. And you can find so many pictures like this of them in buckskin and riding their horses. Here's an actual picture of them after the Spanish had surrendered. And they didn't have horses. They had so little room on the ships that the cavalry walked. But they made a big deal about that cavalry charging up the hill. And the big thing is that his exploits are going to be exaggerated. And he will take the fame of this to become governor of New York, vice president, and then president. Very quickly. So how are they going to invade Cuba? Havana's the capital. They did a blockade. But the main Spanish naval station was at Santiago, right here. So the plan was surround Santiago. The Spanish fleet would have to give it up. They have no choice but to surrender. Basic plan. These are little imperial wars. They know the Spanish don't want to fight to the death. And so, for Santiago, they landed a little bit east of it. The landing was a disaster. Fortunately, there were no Spanish there. They loaded the ships bad. They lost a lot of it in the water. They didn't have enough boats to carry the horses to the horses to pull everything else. That were walked, but to pull the supplies in the cannon. And so anybody want to guess how they got the horses from the ships 1,000 yards off the shore? Yeah, they had men with bugles blow. They hoped the horses would go to the bugles, and they just pushed them overboard until they swam. Some did. They'd been in the army, they knew to follow the bugles. But about a third of the horses were new, they just bought. And so a significant number decided to swim out of Venezuela. Sorry, horses. Maybe they're still gone. Maybe they still got a shot. But that just gives you an idea how just slipshod this operation. Fortunately, the Spanish didn't want to be there. Here's some American soldiers. These are pictures. These are drawings of them right after they landed. These are American soldiers just before the battles around Santiago. There were a number of hills around Santiago that the Spanish had fortified. They take these hills, put guns on them, the Spanish are doomed. The Rough Riders would be involved in the taking of a hill called Kettle Hill and El Cami Ridge. But the most important Spanish fort was at San Juan Hill. It was a stone fort, and that one had to be taken by storm. Teddy Roosevelt would claim the credit for it. And to this day, you hear people talk about San Juan Hill, Teddy Roosevelt, and the Rough Riders. But here's a watercolor, contemporary, of what happened at this battle. And do you notice something about the soldiers that took San Juan Hill? One of the regiments was from Missouri. They were based in this regular soldiers. Well, shot. They're black, and they got no credit for it. They never got awarded. In fact, their white officers got medals. The black soldiers got none. They got none of the credit. 6 and 8 regiments. And Teddy Roosevelt claimed without him leading the way, they never would have taken it, even though that's not true at all. This is the fort after it, pretty blown out. And then they watercolored or they painted it and turned it into postcards. The brand new thing called postcards. Well, after the hills fell, the Spanish fleet tried to make a break for it. They couldn't get past the American ships. They were so old and slow. And that led to treaty negotiations. Thomas Edison, in the first motion picture studio in the United States, in the motion picture capital of the world at that time, New Jersey, he would film a number of reenactments of these battles, including the Rough Riders at El Caney Ridge. And he drew it in New Jersey, and you're going to be shocked. I'm going to show you this clip, how they turned New Jersey into the jungles of Cuba. And you're going to feel like you're in the battle. Now remember, this is 1898, 1899, when they filmed this. They would show these in little vaudeville theaters. And people were like, they'd be just so amazed by what they were seeing. So just be ready. They turned New Jersey into Cuba. Kind of shocking. Takes a while. That's to warm up. These are old. Play. Wow, look at that. And everyone would be like, they all cheered. Okay, things are a little different then. But I do love, and then the horseback, and then one guy, that's supposed to be Teddy Roosevelt. And then we'll rerun it. Doesn't that look like Cuba? Don't you feel like you're on a ridge now? They actually did the Manila Bay, Battle of Manila Bay, but I haven't found a copy of this. I have to look again. But they literally just got little models of boats to put firecrackers and blew it up in like a wash tub. That was their Battle of Manila Bay. Now, you want to see another Edison film? The answer is yes, you do. Let's do this to me again. I don't even know how it does this. Here's another one from 1899. Thank you, Library of Congress. Cats boxing. By the way, look at this guy. And cats never keep their left up. Never. Let's go torture cats. Okay, moving on. So the Spanish-American War ended, and at least on the American point of view, it was relatively bloodless. I mean, it was still horrific, but 385 combat deaths, 800 wounded. But look how many men died or were made sick by disease or food poisoning. Significantly more. Malaria weakened them. Yellow fever just ravaged them. And they had no idea what spread yellow fever. Swamp gas, something like that. And at first it seemed like, especially for those who didn't have to fight or send their sons to go fight, as Secretary of State John Hay said, it was a splendid little war. Hey! But you notice I put part one, because part two is going to be hell on. Hell on. The Philippines. I do like when people like this say, a splendid little war when his son did not have to go fight. Or eat poisoned food. So remember that petrified meat I told you about? More men died of food poisoning than died of the war. They were still using lead to solder the cans of food. Now think about canned food. What a great, remarkable thing that was. You could preserve food. But the problem is, what do they put in cans? As you read in the jungle, it could be anything. This is the first time that large numbers of people ate the processed food out of the new stockyards. They might eat little bits and pieces. And so when stories of this hit, that's part of the reason why Upton Sinclair used the food industry to write The Jungle, because of this, the stuff they would put in these cans. Because they were grinding up this petrified gray meat that had been rotting and spoiling in the basements of these slaughterhouses. And what do? You just put some gravy on it, add some borax or something like that to draw out the smell. And who knows the difference? Close enough to food, right? So there's an American National Guards, a Montana National Guardsman, and he was around Santiago right after the battle, right after the Spanish surrendered. And in stories, he put his spoon into a can of bully beef. So think about like older steers, so kind of stiff, pretty tough meat. Kind of going through it to try to pull it out with his spoon, heard a click. And dug out something that clicked. Guesses. A horseshoe nail. And the thing about a horseshoe nail is, who's with? If they're gonna, I want the hooves ground up, right? But I don't want the nails in there. Yes, of course they're using this. They're using whatever they scraped off the bottom on the floor. And putting it in there, put some gravy in it, stew. It's the thing. They had no idea what they were getting. No idea. So that's a good time to show spam again, right? Spam pancakes, and I don't know what that is, but it's delicious looking. It's spam. The Treaty of Paris of 1898 would be signed. Hey, we're Paris, right? Cuba would be independent, so to speak. The US got Puerto Rico and Guam, still American colonies. And the United States would pay $20 million for the Philippines. Just like after the Mexican War, where we bought the Mexican cession, so we could say, it's a war of conquest, we just happen to buy it. So it's very much like the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The US paid spam. What's that spam on my brain when who doesn't have spam when you're hungry, right? On your brain. Well, now the United States Empire. Now let me show you another picture. So remember those pictures when they tried to make Cubans look sympathetic? Remember that? I showed you the face. Now we're justifying taking. Look at right here. The new empire, the 4th of July, 1898. Cuba, Hawaii, Philippines. And look at the faces now. The point is, can they govern themselves? You see how they draw the faces? Aren't those exactly like those ones I showed you earlier? It went from sympathetic to justify the war to, we got to step in. They can't do this. So. We'll do basic home tomorrow. If you did not have the jungle, I'm making this a lot of points. So make sure you get that in. I am because, you know, I didn't give you that much time. I think we have. I gave you guys the worksheet. Okay. See you, everybody. I forgot about it. Yeah, it's still snowing, everybody. The snow never ends. Oh, man. Where was this at? Oh, you just got it from, or you didn't print it, you took it. Okay, very good. I don't think Sam's. Thank you. Okay.
These are my jungle fiction. I just call them for my.
Where did you do it?
Like, right. On here.
Okay.
Thanks.
We'll see you. Goodbye.
I want